The deafening crack of gunfire pierced the night as Sophia Norwood pulled desperately at her iron shackles, blood trickling down her wrists as the locked wagon rumbled across the rugged terrain of Wyoming Territory in 1875. She knew she had until sunrise before Luther Davis, the notorious outlaw who'd kidnapped her from her family's homestead, would reach his hideout in the mountains where her fate would be sealed forever. Blood pounded in Sophia's ears as the wagon hit another rut in the trail. At 22, she'd grown up hearing stories of women taken by bandits, never to be seen again. Her father, the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties, would pay handsomely for her return, but Sophia had overheard enough to know Davis had no intention of ransoming her back alive. Once he had the money, she would become just another victim buried in an unmarked grave. As moonlight streamed through the cracks in the wagon's wooden slats, Sophia worked frantically at the rusted lock securing her chains to the wagon floor. Davis and his 2 men rode ahead, confident their prisoner couldn't escape. They hadn't searched her thoroughly enough to find the hairpin concealed in her boot, a mistake that might cost them dearly. "Come on," she whispered, jiggling the makeshift pick in the lock. After what seemed like hours, she felt the satisfying click of the mechanism giving way. The chain fell free from the wagon floor, though the heavy iron cuffs remained clasped around her wrists. Sophia crept to the back of the wagon, peering through a gap in the canvas. The 3 riders were visible in the distance, Davis's hulking silhouette unmistakable against the starry sky. They'd slowed to light cigarettes, giving her the moment she needed. Taking a deep breath, Sophia unlatched the wagon door and leapt into the darkness. The impact sent shooting pain through her ankles, but she bit her lip to keep from crying out. The wagon continued rolling away, and she scrambled into the underbrush, her heart hammering against her ribs. The cool night air filled her lungs as she ran blindly through the sagebrush, the chains between her wrists clanking with each desperate stride. She had no idea which direction led to safety, only that she needed to put as much distance between herself and Davis as possible before they discovered her absence. The rugged landscape of the Wyoming Territory stretched endlessly before her, beautiful but unforgiving. Sophia had grown up on these lands, but in the darkness, every shadow looked like a threat, every rustling sound a pursuer. She ran until her legs burned and her lungs ached, following a small creek that wound through the rocky terrain. Dawn was just breaking when she heard the distant shouts. They'd discovered her escape. Sophia ducked behind a cluster of boulders, pressing her body against the cold stone as she fought to control her ragged breathing. The chains between her wrists felt impossibly heavy, the metal digging into her skin with every movement. "They'll kill me if they find me," she whispered, scanning the horizon for any sign of shelter. In the growing light, she spotted a small cabin nestled among the pines about half a mile distant. Smoke curled from its chimney. Someone was home. It could be an ally or another enemy, but Sophia had run out of options. She made her way toward the cabin, staying low and using the terrain for cover. The chains rattled with each step, threatening to give away her position. As she neared the clearing, she could see a corral with 3 horses and a small vegetable garden. It looked like a homestead, not an outlaw camp. Before she could approach any closer, a large hand clamped over her mouth from behind. Sophia struggled violently, kicking and twisting against her captor, but his grip was like iron. "Stop fighting," a deep voice commanded quietly in her ear. "Davis and his men are just over the ridge. You keep thrashing around like that, they'll hear you for sure." Sophia went still, her eyes wide with fear. The man slowly removed his hand from her mouth, but kept a firm grip on her arm. "Who are you?" she whispered, turning to face him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that suggested years under the harsh western sun. Dark stubble covered his strong jaw, and his eyes, sharp and alert, were the color of faded denim. He wore a dusty cowboy hat and carried a Winchester rifle slung across his back. Most striking was the long scar that ran from his left temple down to his jawline. "Name's Yates Irwin," he said, his voice low and rough, as if unused to speaking. "And you're making enough noise to wake the dead with those chains." Sophia held up her shackled wrists. "I can't help it. They took me from my father's ranch 3 days ago. I managed to get free of the wagon, but—" Yates examined the iron cuffs with a frown. "Blacksmith work. Nasty business. He glanced toward the ridge where Davis and his men would be searching. That your pa's ranch down in Clearwater Valley? Norwood Place. Sophia nodded, surprised. How did you heard talk in town? Word spreads fast when Benjamin Norwood's daughter goes missing. He gestured toward his cabin. Come on. Can't stay out in the open. She hesitated, unsure if she could trust this stranger. I ain't with them, if that's what you're thinking, Yates said, seeming to read her mind. But suit yourself. Stay out here if you want. The sound of distant hoofbeats made the decision for her. Sophia followed Yates through the underbrush toward his cabin, wincing as the chains clinked with each hurried step. Inside, the cabin was spare but orderly, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table, and narrow bed in the corner. Rifles and tools hung on the walls, and a bookshelf held a surprising number of volumes. It was the home of a solitary man, but not a slovenly one. Sit, Yates commanded, pointing to a chair while he moved to the window, peering out cautiously through the curtains. They're coming this way. Sophia's breath caught. Will they search here? Likely, he said grimly, reaching for one of the rifles on the wall. Davis knows I live up here. We've had disagreements. Fear gripped her anew. I've brought trouble to your door. I should go. You wouldn't make it 10 yards, he cut her off. Besides, those chains need dealing with. He moved to a trunk in the corner, rummaging through tools before producing a heavy set of bolt cutters. These might do the trick. Give me your hands. Sophia extended her wrists, watching as Yates positioned the cutters over the chain linking the cuffs. His hands were calloused but steady, his movements precise. With a grunt of effort, he squeezed the handles together, and the chain snapped with a metallic ping. The cuffs remained around her wrists, but she could move her arms independently now. Thank you, she breathed, flexing her arms. Yates nodded once, already moving back to the window. They're coming up the trail. 5 minutes, maybe less. What are we going to do? Panic edged into her voice. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. You got 2 choices. Hide under the floorboards, or pretend you're my wife. Sophia blinked in surprise. Your wife. Davis knows I live alone. If he sees a woman here, he'll be suspicious. Yates gestured to a trapdoor partially hidden under a rug. Where you can hide down there. It's tight, but it's where I keep supplies in case of Indian raids. Your choice. The idea of being trapped underground, unable to escape if Davis discovered her, made Sophia's skin crawl. I'll be your wife, she decided quickly. Yates nodded, moving efficiently around the cabin. He tossed her a shawl from a hook by the door. Put this on. Cover those cuffs. And take down your hair, you look too much like a captive. Sophia obeyed, unwinding her long chestnut hair from its disheveled braid and draping the woolen shawl over her shoulders. The cuffs were still visible, but less obvious. What's our story? She asked, trying to calm her racing heart. We've been married 6 months. You're from over Silver Creek way. Don't elaborate unless pressed. He paused, watching her from across the room. And one more thing. I don't talk much. People know that about me. Before she could respond, the sound of horses approaching filled the air. Yates moved to her side, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. The gesture was impersonal, practical, but Sophia couldn't help noticing the warmth of him, the solidity of his presence. Follow my lead, he murmured. And whatever happens, don't run. Moments later, heavy fists pounded on the door. Yates gave her shoulder a squeeze before stepping away to answer it, his movements deliberate, unhurried. When he swung the door open, Luther Davis stood on the threshold, flanked by his men. Davis was a bear of a man, with a thick black beard and cold eyes that immediately fixed on Sophia. Recognition flickered across his face, quickly replaced by suspicion. Owen, he growled. Didn't know you had company. Yates said nothing, simply stood in the doorway, blocking entry. We're looking for a girl, Davis continued, his gaze never leaving Sophia. Runaway. Dangerous. Killed one of my men back down the trail. Sophia fought to keep her expression neutral, though inside, she was reeling. She hadn't killed anyone. It was a lie to justify shooting her on sight. This is my wife, Yates said, the words so quiet Sophia almost didn't hear them. Davis's eyebrows rose in exaggerated surprise. Wife? Well now, that's interesting. Don't recall hearing you got hitched, Irwin. He stepped forward, forcing Yates to give ground or physically block him. Madam, when exactly did you marry our friend here? Sophia swallowed hard. 6 months ago, Mr. Davis. We keep to ourselves mostly. 6 months, Davis repeated slowly, his eyes narrowing. Funny timing that. Right around when Irwin here cost me a very profitable cattle deal. He turned back to Yates. Still holding that grudge, are we? After all, it was just business. Rustling ain't business, Yates replied, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. It's thieving. Davis's face hardened. You mind if we come in? Just to warm ourselves a spell. It wasn't a request. The three men pushed their way inside, filling the small cabin with their menacing presence. One of them, a wiry man with a pockmarked face, circled behind Sophia, eyeing her with unconcealed interest. Pretty wife you got, Irwin, Davis remarked, settling himself uninvited at the table. What's your name, darling? Sarah, Sophia answered quickly, using her mother's name. Sarah Irwin. Sarah, Davis repeated, drawing out the syllables as if tasting them. You know, you look mighty familiar. You ever been to Clearwater Valley? No, sir, she lied. I'm from Silver Creek. The pockmarked man moved closer, and Sophia could smell whiskey and sweat. Boss, don't she look just like that Norwood girl? Same eyes. Davis smiled, a predatory baring of teeth. You know, I was thinking the same thing. He turned to Yates. Your wife sure bears a striking resemblance to a very valuable young lady who's gone missing. Lot of brown-haired women in the territory, Yates replied evenly. True enough. Davis drummed his fingers on the table. Mind if she shows us her wrists? Sophia's blood ran cold. The iron cuffs were partially visible beneath the shawl, and if she removed it, there would be no hiding the truth. Before she could respond, Yates stepped between her and Davis. You've seen my wife. She's not your runaway. Time for you to move on. Davis stood slowly, his hand hovering near his holstered pistol. I don't think I'm satisfied yet, Irwin. In fact, I think you're harboring my property. He nodded to his men. Check her wrists. The pockmarked man lunged for Sophia, grabbing at her shawl. She stumbled backward, but not before he caught a glimpse of the iron cuff on her right wrist. She's wearing shackles, he crowed triumphantly. What happened next unfolded in a blur of violence. Yates's fist connected with the pockmarked man's jaw with a sickening crack, sending him crashing into the bookshelf. Davis drew his gun, but Yates was faster, tackling him around the waist and driving him into the wall. The third outlaw grabbed Sophia, pressing a knife to her throat. Stop, Irwin, or I cut her pretty throat, he shouted. Yates froze, his eyes locking with Sophia's across the room. In that moment, she saw something fierce and resolute in his gaze, and she knew what she had to do. Sophia drove her elbow backward with all her strength, catching her captor in the ribs. As he doubled over, she brought her shackled wrists down hard on the back of his neck. The heavy iron cuffs connected with a dull thud, and the man crumpled to the floor. Davis had regained his footing and raised his pistol toward Yates, who had no time to draw his own weapon. Without thinking, Sophia grabbed a cast-iron skillet from the stove and hurled it across the room. It struck Davis's arm just as he fired, sending the bullet into the ceiling. Yates seized the moment, drawing his revolver and leveling it at Davis's head. Drop it, he commanded, his voice deadly quiet. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, Davis lowered his weapon to the floor. This ain't over, Irwin, he snarled. It is for now. Yates kicked Davis's gun away, then gestured to the door with his revolver. Get your men and get out. And Davis, you come near my property again, they'll find your body come spring thaw. After the outlaws had been disarmed and sent riding away with a warning that the sheriff would hear about the kidnapping, Sophia collapsed into a chair, her hands shaking violently. They'll be back, she whispered. With more men. Yates was moving around the cabin efficiently, gathering supplies and weapons. Not tonight they won't. Storm's coming in from the north. We've got until morning, at least. We need to get to my father's ranch, Sophia said. He has men, guns. We be safe there. Clearwater's 2 days hard ride, and Davis will have men watching the trails. Yates paused in his preparations. There's an army outpost at Fort Laramie. It's closer. We head there, report the kidnapping. Army doesn't take kindly to outlaws operating in their territory. Sophia nodded, rising on unsteady legs. Thank you. For everything. You didn't have to help me. Yates looked at her for a long moment, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. No decent man would have done different. He held up the bolt cutters again. Let's get those cuffs off before we ride. It took nearly 30 minutes of careful work with the bolt cutters, a file, and finally a chisel and hammer to break the iron cuffs from Sophia's wrists. When the last one fell away, she couldn't hold back the tears of relief. "Thank you," she whispered again, rubbing her raw, bruised skin. Yates gently took her wrists in his hands, examining the damage. Without a word, he went to a small cabinet and returned with a jar of salve and some clean cloth. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he tended to her wounds, wrapping them carefully to protect against the coming ride. "Why did you help me?" Sophia asked softly. "You put yourself in terrible danger for a stranger." Yates continued his work for several moments before answering. "Davis and I have history. Bad blood. That's not an answer." He finished tying off the bandage before meeting her eyes. 5 years ago, Davis and his gang raided a settlement near Fort Collins. Killed everyone. Men, women, children. His voice was flat, but Sophia could sense the emotion beneath it. "My sister was there, visiting her husband's family." Understanding dawned on Sophia. "I'm so sorry." Army couldn't prove it was them. No witnesses left alive. He stood, putting away the medical supplies. "Been tracking Davis ever since. Waiting for a chance to bring him to justice." "Is that why you live up here alone?" "To watch him." Yates nodded once. "His main camp is about 15 miles north. He doesn't know I know where it is." "And you never—" She hesitated. "You never thought about taking justice into your own hands?" "Every day." His gaze was unflinching. "But that would make me no better than him." As they prepared to leave, gathering supplies and saddling horses, Sophia found herself watching Yates with new eyes. He moved with quiet efficiency, a man of few words but decisive actions. In the space of hours, he had become her protector, her ally against a cruel world. The storm hit just as they were ready to depart, driving rain mixed with sleet making travel impossible. They would have to wait until morning. "You take the bed," Yates said, stoking the fire against the encroaching chill. "I'll keep watch." "You need rest too," Sophia argued. "We can take turns." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Stubborn, aren't you? My father says it's my worst quality." She smiled back, surprising herself with how natural it felt. "I doubt that," Yates murmured, almost too quiet to hear. As the night deepened and the storm raged outside, they talked. At first, it was practical matters, routes to Fort Laramie, what to expect from Davis, signals they would use if separated. But gradually, as the fire burned low and the cabin grew shadowy, the conversation shifted to more personal ground. Sophia learned that Yates had been a scout for the Army during the war, then a ranch foreman until his sister's death changed everything. He didn't speak of it directly, but she understood that grief had driven him to this solitary existence, this single-minded pursuit of justice. In turn, she told him about growing up on her father's sprawling ranch, her mother's death from fever 3 years prior, and her own dreams of someday running the ranch herself, dreams her father dismissed as inappropriate for a daughter. "He wants me to marry well," she explained. "Preferably to someone who can take over the ranch when he's gone. He doesn't believe a woman can handle it." "He's wrong," Yates said simply. "You handled yourself better today than most men I've known." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. As the night wore on, they settled into a comfortable silence, Yates cleaning his weapons while Sophia mended a tear in her dress. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, rattling the windows and sending occasional drafts through the cabin. "Why don't you talk much?" Sophia asked suddenly. "To other people, I mean." Yates's hand stilled on the rifle barrel he was oiling. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. "Words don't come easy to me," he finally said. "Never have. And after what happened to Jenny, my sister, seemed like there wasn't much worth saying anyway. But you talk to me." His eyes met hers across the room, dark and intent. "Yes, I do." Something passed between them in that moment. Something Sophia couldn't name but felt in the quickening of her pulse. She looked away first, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance and the intimacy of their situation. "You should get some rest," Yates said, breaking the tension. "Dawn comes early, and we've got a hard ride ahead." Sophia nodded, moving toward the bed. She paused, looking back at him. "Thank you, Yates. Not just for the rescue, but for..." She gestured vaguely around the cabin. For talking to me. The storm passed in the night, leaving a world washed clean and sparkling with frost in the early morning light. They set out at first light, Yates leading the way on a sturdy buckskin gelding while Sophia rode a smaller, quick-footed mare. He had outfitted her with a Winchester rifle of her own and shown her how to use it, a gesture that spoke volumes about his respect for her capabilities. The trail to Fort Laramie was treacherous, winding through rocky passes and open stretches where they would be vulnerable to attack. Yates set a punishing pace, clearly hoping to reach the outpost before Davis could organize a proper pursuit. They had been riding for nearly 4 hours when Yates suddenly raised his hand, signaling a halt. He dismounted silently, motioning for Sophia to do the same, and led the horses into a stand of pines. "What is it?" she whispered, tying her mare next to his gelding. "Riders," he murmured, pointing to a ridge about half a mile distant. 3 of them, moving fast. Sophia's heart sank. "Davis?" "Can't tell yet, but we need to move on foot from here." He unstrapped a pair of field glasses from his saddlebag and studied the distant riders. "Davis and 2 I don't recognize. Not the same men from yesterday. What do we do? We've got 2 choices. Double back, try to circle around them, or..." He hesitated. "Or what? Or we end this. Here. Now." Yates's expression was grim. "Set a trap, take them by surprise. With any luck, we capture Davis alive, bring him into the army. With the kidnapping charges and your testimony, they'd hang him this time." Sophia considered the options. Doubling back would mean at least another day's journey, increasing the risk of running into more of Davis's men. But confronting him directly was incredibly dangerous. "If we succeed, it's over," she said slowly. "No more looking over our shoulders. No more fear." Yates nodded. "But if we fail?" "We won't," Sophia said with more confidence than she felt. "Tell me what to do." They worked quickly, selecting a narrow pass where the trail squeezed between 2 rocky outcroppings. Yates positioned Sophia behind a boulder with a clear line of sight to the trail, her Winchester loaded and ready. "Remember what I showed you," he said, checking her rifle one last time. "Breathe out when you squeeze the trigger. Aim for the center of the body, not the head, bigger target." "I remember." She met his eyes steadily. "Be careful." Something shifted in his expression. "You too, Sophia." It was the first time he'd used her name, and it sent an unexpected thrill through her. Yates took his position on the opposite side of the pass, partially hidden by a stand of junipers. The plan was simple but risky: let Davis and his men ride into the pass. Then Yates would block their retreat, while Sophia covered the forward path. With luck, they could force a surrender without bloodshed. The wait seemed interminable. Sophia's hands grew cold on the rifle barrel, and she flexed them periodically to maintain circulation. The sun climbed higher, casting sharp-edged shadows across the rocky terrain. Then she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats approaching. Sophia pressed herself flatter against the boulder, steadying her breathing as Yates had taught her. Through a gap in the rocks, she caught glimpses of the 3 riders approaching. Davis led the way, his massive frame unmistakable even at a distance. They entered the pass single file, the narrow trail forcing them to proceed cautiously. When they reached the midpoint, Yates stepped out from his hiding place, rifle raised. "That's far enough, Davis," he called, his voice echoing off the rock walls. The outlaws reined in sharply, Davis's hand immediately going to his sidearm. "I wouldn't," Yates warned. "Drop your weapons. All of you." Davis's laugh was ugly. "You think I'm afraid of you, Irwin? 1 man against 3? 2 against 3. Sophia corrected, rising from behind her boulder with her rifle trained on them. "And we have the high ground." Davis's eyes widened slightly when he saw her. "Well, if it isn't the Norwood girl. Playing outlaw now, are we?" "The only outlaw here is you, Davis," she replied steadily. "For kidnapping, murder, and Lord knows what else. It ends today." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Davis smiled, a slow, calculating expression that sent chills down Sophia's spine. "Maybe you're right," he said, raising his hand slightly. "Maybe it does end today." What happened next unfolded with terrible speed. Davis suddenly jerked his horse sideways, using the animal as a shield while drawing his pistol. His first shot went wide, kicking up dust near Yates's feet. The other 2 outlaws spurred their mounts, one charging towards Sophia, the other toward Yates. Sophia fired. The Winchesters report thunderous in the confined space. Her shot caught the charging rider in the shoulder, sending him tumbling from his horse. Before she could chamber another round, Davis was firing at her, forcing her to duck behind the boulder as bullets whined off the rock face. Across the pass, Yates was engaged in a desperate struggle with the third outlaw, who had tackled him to the ground. They grappled for control of Yates's rifle, rolling dangerously close to the edge of a steep drop. Sophia chambered another round and risked a glance around the boulder. Davis had dismounted and was advancing on her position, firing methodically to keep her pinned down. The wounded outlaw was struggling to his feet, drawing a knife from his boot. Making a split-second decision, Sophia took aim at the wounded man first, knowing he was the immediate threat. Her shot caught him in the chest, and he collapsed without a sound. Davis, momentarily distracted by his comrade's fall, presented a clear target. Sophia squeezed the trigger, but her shot went high, grazing Davis's shoulder instead of stopping him. The giant outlaw bellowed in pain and rage, charging toward her position with reckless abandon. Sophia tried to chamber another round, but in her haste, the mechanism jammed. With no time to clear it, she abandoned the rifle and drew the revolver Yates had given her as backup. Davis reached the boulder, his massive frame looming over her. Sophia fired twice in rapid succession, both shots striking him in the torso. He staggered, but didn't fall, raising his own pistol with murderous intent. "You should have stayed in that wagon, girl," he growled, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. Before he could fire, a shot rang out from across the pass. Davis jerked, a look of surprise crossing his face as a red stain blossomed on his chest. He toppled forward, landing heavily at Sophia's feet. Yates stood across the pass, pistol still raised, the third outlaw lying motionless nearby. For a long moment, neither of them moved, the echo of gunfire still hanging in the air. Then Yates lowered his weapon and crossed the distance between them in long strides. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. Sophia shook her head, her whole body trembling with the aftermath of violence. No, I'm all right." She looked down at Davis's still form. "Is he?" Yates knelt, checking for a pulse. "Dead," he confirmed grimly. All three of them. Relief mingled with shock as the reality of what had just happened washed over Sophia. "We did it," she whispered. "It's over." Yates holstered his pistol and, without warning, pulled her into his arms. She went willingly, burying her face against his chest as delayed fear and adrenaline crashed through her system. His heartbeat was strong and rapid beneath her ear, his arms secure around her. "You were brave," he murmured against her hair. "Braver than anyone I've ever known." They stood like that for several minutes, finding solace in each other's presence amid the aftermath of violence. When they finally separated, something had changed between them, a barrier broken, a connection forged in fire and danger. "What now?" Sophia asked, looking at the bodies of the outlaws. "We still head to Fort Laramie," Yates replied, his hand lingering on her arm. "Report what happened. Then get word to your father that you're safe." The journey to the fort took another full day, but without the threat of pursuit, they traveled more openly. The commanding officer at Fort Laramie, a graying colonel named Hargrove, took their statements with grave attention, particularly when he learned that Luther Davis, wanted for multiple murders and robberies throughout the territory, was dead. "The Army's been after Davis for years," Hargrove told them, offering cigars to Yates and sherry to Sophia in his office after their debriefing. "You two have done the territory a great service. I'll see that the proper authorities are notified." A telegram was sent to Benjamin Norwood, informing him of his daughter's safety and promising a military escort to return her home when she was ready. The reply came the next morning. Her father would come himself, with an armed party, and would arrive within 3 days. Those 3 days at Fort Laramie became a strange interlude for Sophia and Yates. Removed from immediate danger for the first time since they'd met, they found themselves navigating a new kind of terrain, the growing attraction between them. Yates was given quarters in the officers' section, while Sophia was housed with the colonel's wife, a kind woman who provided fresh clothing and feminine companionship that Sophia hadn't realized she'd been missing. But each day, Sophia and Yates found time to walk the perimeter of the fort together, their conversations growing deeper and more personal with each passing hour. On the evening before her father was due to arrive, they stood on the fort's eastern wall, watching the sunset paint the plains in gold and crimson. "What will you do now?" Sophia asked. "With Davis gone?" Yates was quiet for a long moment, his profile sharp against the darkening sky. "Don't know," he finally admitted. "Been chasing him so long. Haven't thought much beyond catching him." "You could go back to ranching," she suggested. "You said you were a foreman once." He nodded slowly. "Could do. My father needs good men," Sophia said, her heart beating faster. "The Norwood Ranch is the largest in the county. There would be a place for you there, if you wanted it." Yates turned to look at her fully, his eyes searching her face. "Is that what you want, Sophia? For me to work for your father?" The directness of his gaze made her breath catch. "I want you to be where I can see you," she answered honestly. "Where we can. Where we might have a chance to know what this is between us." A smile rare and transformative spread across his features. "I've been half in love with you since you threw that skillet at Davis's head," he confessed. "Never met a woman with so much fire in her." Sophia laughed, surprising herself with the sound. "And I've been falling for you since you broke those chains and helped me escape." She sobered slightly. "But my father, he has plans for me. He'll expect me to marry someone of his choosing, someone with connections or money. And a quiet ex-army scout with nothing but a cabin in the hills doesn't fit that description," Yates finished for her. "No," she agreed. "But I'm not the same woman who was taken from my father's ranch. I've learned what I'm capable of, what I want." She reached out, tentatively touching his hand. "And what I want is a chance for us." Yates turned his hand over, capturing hers. "Then we'll find a way," he said simply, and in his voice was a promise that made her heart soar. Benjamin Norwood arrived the next day with 10 armed ranch hands and a determination to reclaim his daughter. He was a barrel-chested man with graying hair and Sophia's same amber eyes. And when he saw her waiting at the fort's entrance, he broke protocol entirely, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped and sweeping her into a crushing embrace. "My girl," he kept saying, his voice thick with emotion. "My darling girl." The reunion was joyful but brief, as Benjamin Norwood was not a man to linger when business remained to be done. Colonel Hargrove hosted a formal dinner that evening, during which the full story of Sophia's kidnapping, escape, and the demise of Luther Davis was recounted for her father's benefit. Throughout the meal, Sophia was acutely aware of Yates sitting quietly at the far end of the table, speaking only when directly addressed. He had shaved and borrowed a clean shirt from one of the officers, but he still looked out of place among the military men and her father's party. When the meal concluded, Benjamin Norwood requested a private word with Yates. Sophia watched with trepidation as the two men stepped outside onto the porch of the officers' quarters. "What do you suppose they're discussing?" Colonel Hargrove's wife asked, coming to stand beside Sophia at the window. "My future, most likely," Sophia replied with a small smile. Through the window, she could see her father doing most of the talking, his hands gesturing emphatically while Yates listened, his expression unreadable. Then, to Sophia's surprise, her father extended his hand, which Yates shook firmly. When they returned inside, Benjamin Norwood approached his daughter with a bemused expression. "That young man of yours doesn't say much, does he?" "He says what matters," Sophia replied, her heart leaping at the words, "your young man." "What did you discuss?" Her father harumphed. "He asked for a job on the ranch. Said he has experience as a foreman." "And what did you say?" "I told him I don't need another foreman." Benjamin's stern expression softened slightly. "But I might need a son-in-law who knows ranching, if he proves himself worthy of my daughter." Sophia stared at her father in astonishment. "You're not serious?" "Oh, I'm quite serious about the proving himself part," Benjamin clarified. "But I've never seen you look at anyone the way you look at him. And any man who would face down Luther Davis to protect you deserves consideration." He patted her hand awkwardly. "Your mother would have wanted you to marry for love, Sophia. I've been too focused on the ranch's future to remember that." Tears pricked at Sophia's eyes as she embraced her father. "Thank you," she whispered. Later that evening, Sophia found Yates standing alone on the fort's wall, gazing out at the star-filled sky. "My father says you asked for a job," she said, coming to stand beside him. "I did." Yates turned to her, his expression serious in the moonlight. But that's not all I asked for. Sophia's heart quickened. What else? Permission to court his daughter properly, Yates said, taking her hands in his. If she's willing. She's more than willing, Sophia replied, smiling through sudden tears. She's been waiting for you to break your silence and say exactly that. Yates stepped closer, one hand rising to gently cup her face. I've been silent too long, he murmured. But some things need saying, Sophia Norwood. I love you. Have since the moment you fought back against impossible odds. And if you'll have me, I'll spend my life making sure you never face such dangers again. In answer, Sophia rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tender at first, then deepened with shared passion and promise. When they finally parted, they remained close, foreheads touching, breath mingling in the cool night air. I love you too, Yates Irwin, Sophia whispered. And I don't need protecting. I just need you beside me, facing whatever comes together. Spring came to the Norwood Ranch in a riot of wildflowers and new beginnings. Yates proved himself an invaluable addition to the operation, his knowledge of the land and livestock earning Benjamin Norwood's grudging respect, which gradually blossomed into genuine affection. Sophia, meanwhile, convinced her father to let her take a more active role in ranch management, a compromise reached after she demonstrated her natural head for business by negotiating a lucrative new cattle contract with Army suppliers at Fort Laramie. On a perfect June morning, with the Bighorn Mountains rising majestically in the distance, Sophia Norwood became Sophia Irwin in a ceremony held on the ranch's front lawn. The bride wore her mother's lace veil and carried wildflowers gathered from the same hills where she had once fled for her life. And when it came time to speak his vows, Yates Irwin, a man once defined by his silence, found all the words he needed, his voice clear and strong as he promised to love, honor, and cherish the woman who had broken through his defenses and healed his wounded heart. As they rode away from the celebration toward the small house Benjamin had built for them on the ranch's eastern boundary, Sophia caught her new husband smiling, a sight that once would have been rare but now came easily and often. What are you thinking about? She asked, guiding her mare alongside his gelding. How sometimes the worst moments lead to the best, he replied, reaching across to take her hand. If you hadn't escaped that wagon, if you hadn't broken those chains, she continued, if we hadn't faced Davis together. Sophia smiled, squeezing his fingers. Then we wouldn't be here, starting our life together. Exactly. Yates raised her hand to his lips. And that's a chain I never want to break. The sun dipped toward the western horizon as they rode on, casting long shadows across the land that would be their home, their legacy, their shared future stretching endlessly before them, no longer prisoners of the past, but partners in all that was yet to come.